Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. The topic at hand is the new and improved Infor OS Portal. So this is a feature that came out in the April release for the multi-tenant customers. From what I've seen, I know Infor did a webinar on it back in the spring or early summer, maybe. But even within my customers base that I work with, I'm not seeing a lot of traction with it or a whole lot of adoption of the new tool. So I wanted to put together this webinar to kind of cover why we think it will benefit the organization and also why it's important because of this replacement that's coming for Infor Mingle, and what does that mean to your organization? How can you plan for that, and how can you get there? First, I wanted to cover a little bit about Intellias for those of you who may not be as familiar with the organization. We've been in the Infor Lawson space since 1999. So for quite some time, and obtained our Infor Alliance partnership within the past 10 years. Traditionally, and still to this day, we're pretty well known for our complementary software offerings. These would be things that kind of supplement or bolt into the Infor product, such as the payroll job automation, expense entry for employees, and time entry, benefit add-ins, things like that. In addition to all of our complementary software, we also have a full array of consulting services, from anything as small to custom development work to upgrading on-premise Lawson servers and doing full cloud implementation, bringing on new modules, moving to CloudSuite, everything on the technical side and on the functional side or application side of things. So for that agenda, again, what is this Infor OS portal? What's new? What's improved? Then from that, what are our action items, things that you can take back to your organization and act on even today? And then we'll open it up for a Q&A. I've also invited Jasmine from our team to do a little bit of a live demo. So I'm going to cover concepts and things at a higher level, and then we can open up the system and kind of drill into it, do a little bit of a show and tell. So I just do want to start with the fact sheet. This is definitely for multi-tenant customers only. So if you're an on-premise customer, this would not apply to you. Even if you have Infor OS on-premise, it does not apply to you. This is for the multi-tenant customer base only. So if you are a single tenant customer and you've done the Infor OS CE upgrade, which I think most all have gone through at this point, technically you do have Infor OS multi-tenant. So that would be, you would fall into that multi-tenant customer category. What this is, and this kind of sounds scary to some of our customers, but it really is a retirement of Mingle. The core functionality of the system is largely remaining the same, with a huge overhaul and improvement with the user experience. It is a migration process. What we can see from the back end is you're certainly moving data over to potentially new infrastructure, new systems. So there is a migration element there. There are parts of the infrastructure that are being retired, but the net result ultimately is kind of the same portal look and feel with some new functionality. Interestingly enough, the Mingle, for those of you that have been on Lawson for some time and remember upgrading to version 10, this concept of Mingle was introduced. It's pretty much going away. From a lot of what I've seen on the front end, all of that branding is gone. And we're back to Portal, which we were not supposed to talk about for a number of years. And now everything's being branded as Portal V2. So that's coming back into the picture. Some of the more exciting features are the revamped homepages. So some of you may be familiar with the homepages application inside of Infor OS today. That is, I don't want to say it's going away, but it's replaced by an improved feature that will bring a lot of benefits to the organization. Also, the social functions are going away. I haven't seen this adopted really anywhere. If you have adopted it, I'd be curious to hear how that's going or why. But back when Mingle was originally introduced, they kind of put a old school Facebook type of thing into it, where you could share things and post things, and there was a wall, and it's pretty dated by today's social media standards. And I think a lot of that will be sunset out of the product, so that won't be a piece of it anymore. And I would say in terms of, it's action required, Mingle's being retired, you have to migrate. What does that mean to me? I would say by and large from what we've seen, if you're not leveraging home pages today or much of the contextual applications outside of what's delivered out of the box, it really is a pretty easy lift. There's not a major effort from the technology group to move things over. There obviously will be some change management with the look and feel, and we'll get into that. And you'll have to address that with your users. But for the most part, it's a pretty seamless transition. So what I wanted to cover are really 6 major improvements in my opinion. These would be things that regardless of Infor saying you have to do this at a certain time, I would want to do this because of these 6 things. So we'll go over and cover what those are. The tabbed browsing feature native within the application. So what I do a lot of when I'm working with CloudSuite today is I'm in Chrome and I'm duplicating tabs, and it's all managed at the browser level with multiple tabs inside of the browser. There's now a tabbed experience within Infor OS, so it's self-contained within one browser tab, and you have your application switcher inside of it. Kind of like if you're used to Smart Office, or if you've adopted the Lawson portal, the new version of that, where they have tab browsing inside of it. It's a very similar concept. Everything is workspace driven. So we talked about home pages being retired. The home pages application is something I haven't seen really well adopted by most customers, to be honest. Part of the reason I think for that is it's a little bit isolated. It's kind of in a silo. It's a separate little world, and it's disconnected from all the other ERPs. That's been replaced by the concept of a workspace. And with the revamp, the workspaces are front and center. So when you log in, really the user is being directed into a workspace to where they're drilling into other parts of the application. We'll go through a little bit about what that looks like. I also think there's major improvements to bookmarks. Again, not that this is a major overhaul of functionality or a brand new feature. You can actually do bookmarks in the application today, but I think the way you interact with, and kind of access those bookmarks is a huge improvement with this newer release. The Infor OS applications are also consolidated. I think it's just eliminating noise. In the application switcher in the current version of Infor OS, there's pages and pages and pages of things, and more than half of them almost are what I would call Infor OS applications. It's a lot of stuff to sort through. You can get lost. Those are consolidated and more streamlined into one specific area. The contextual applications and the usability of those, so that menu on the right that you can collapse, kind of accordion thing that pulls up information based on the records you're looking at. I think there's huge improvements there that we'll look at. And then we'll also talk about the Infor OS app designer. So for each of these features, I just kind of talked about them at a high level. I really just want to go through and show the old and the new so we can kind of get that side-by-side comparison. So the first one that we'll look at is the workspaces concept. So I mentioned home pages before. If you log into your tenant today and you go and look, there's this home pages icon here. And that's what I was saying, where it's really, yes, you can make this the default landing page for users, but it's really its own standalone type of thing. It's kind of isolated off. You have to purposely go there. If you navigate out of it, you don't really come back. I think it's a little bit hard to use in that sense. But the concept of the home pages is really still the same with workspaces. So home pages are being replaced by workspaces. And within the home pages or now workspaces application, you have the ability to create what I would call dashboards, basically, that are contextually relevant to different user types. So in this example, we have an employee. You can have a manager, you can have a controller, you can really have anything you want, and then provision and push those out by security role or by user. And users can have one to many, right? So you're not just locked into one dashboard or one homepage. In this example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that are assigned to me, right? And I can toggle between all of them. That concept's not changing. What's really changing ultimately is that the workspaces are front and center. So when I log in now, my application switcher, and you can see some of this tabbed browsing, right? So within the core single browser tab, I now have my 3 applications inside of here that I can toggle back and forth. The start menu, or the 9-box menu, or the Rubik's Cube, I've heard a lot of names for it. that icon is still there, but now when I click it, you'll notice in the old world, when I click it, I have this grid to go through and page through the applications. Now it's this menu, which should look familiar if you've been using the new Infor support site. It's a similar look and feel. But the first thing you're shown is the workspaces, right? It's the top of the list, right where you drop in and right where your eyes are drawn to when you log in. So if you choose to deploy the workspaces, really this is a quick link to all of your different, what were home pages in the old world, basically. Right now, from what I've seen, the functionality and capability of these workspaces is very similar to the home pages. There's a page that you create, you publish it out to users, and that page is comprised of one-to-many widgets. And the different applications publish widgets out. Very similar concept. It's just the integration these have with the application is much more, I think, intuitive. And it seems to be like Infor is really drawing users into these workspaces as opposed to, and I'm guilty of it, right? If I'm in FSM or I'm in HR talent, that's my landing zone. I go straight there. This is really trying to take these role-based approaches to draw people out into other areas of the application. So the one I have example or shown here is the out-of-the-box employee menu or employee workspace. Those can also be configured. Oops, where that text came from on the screen. Let me get that out of there. Sorry, so you can take those employee homepages that Infor provides to you out of the box, copy them, configure them to be your own, and then publish them out to users as a replacement. So we still have our application switcher. I've now pulled in web widgets, so I have links to my company website. I've added additional widgets for benefits, and clicking on any of these things is then going to drill you out into a new tab right into the core application. So for somebody like a manager is a great example because typically with Infor with CloudSuite, you're going to have HR talent, you're going to have FSM, you might have workforce management, you might have expense management, you have Burst, you have Infor BI. Really, these are all separate links and separate areas that a user will go to. This is a consolidation of relevant information per user or really user type. So here's an example of how some of this may be configured and some of the different things. All of this is low code, no code type of environment. So to build a landing page, you don't need to be a developer. Really, it's a drag and drop collection of widgets, and you size them, move them around, and turn them on. And then it's all the security is the biggest piece of the overhead and the management of that. So users can be assigned to multiple workspaces. So typically you're going to see a workspace aligned almost by security role, by user type. And just like how the security model works, if I'm a HR generalist or if I'm a payables processor, I'm also an employee, right? And so I have two different security roles assigned, thus I may have two separate workspaces. So users can be assigned both to mandatory and default workspaces. So a mandatory workspace is one that we auto provision out and assign to them that they can't unsubscribe from. And then the default workspace is going to be where do you land, when you log in. So if you have employee self-service turned on in HR talent, the employee workspace is a great default workspace to go into. And this third piece is controlled through security. So it's not like anyone in the organization come out there and develop workspaces, but through security, there are roles that are available to make people workspace builders or workspace developers. So you can select from a pre-built library and also copy and build your own based on the catalog that Infor delivers with the application. I think the biggest benefits here, the workspaces, they're integrating core ERP functions into a single space by user type. So again, you have HR talent, you have FSM, you have multiple different applications, multiple different areas that users are going, even sometimes corporate internal stuff, right? If you have a SharePoint site that everyone goes to today and a link for an employee handbook or something like that, I mean, all of that technically can be pushed into a workspace. The idea being one-stop shop for any resource that the user would need centralized around the Infor ERP. As of today, there's 18 delivered workspaces. 7 more are mentioned in the October preview. This is why I think this is so important, is you may be saying, workspaces are, whatever, that's cool. We don't think we'll adopt it. What I'm seeing, and I think as we look at the October release webinar that's coming up, that the product teams are going to continue to push more and more content into these workspaces and widgets. So that's where the product development and investment is being made. To me, I'd want to kind of align with that so we can take advantage of these new features as they're released. So I'm seeing a lot of work and effort being put into the workspaces, and more of these are being developed, enhanced, improved, and released in the April and October release windows. Again, those workspaces are made up of widgets, and so there's 224 widgets delivered out of the box. You can also create your own. That's the Infor OS application designer we'll get to in a second. So for the bookmarks, this is a real quick one. I'll be honest, I didn't even know about this feature until about a year ago, and I've been using the system for a long time. Admittedly, I'm not I'm more of an implementer. I don't use the system every single day. So the bookmarks aren't as relevant to me because I don't typically come back to the same area. But if you didn't know about this today, there's this little link here to bookmark the page, and then you can quick link into any area you are within the application. So in this example, I'm on the manage vendors list. I can create a bookmark that brings me right back to manage vendors, no matter where I'm at, and access it from this application. To me, it's a little bit hidden, a little bit out of the way. And if you're a heavy bookmark user, I prefer, I think, the new usability in the Infor OS portal. So now this bookmarking feature has been pulled into this arrow on the tab. And again, wherever you are, it'll contextually pull that in. You can then choose the name of your bookmark and push it out. And so the big change again is the bookmarks front and center. So normally we're used to that top left menu being bring me to HR talent, bring me to FSM, bring me to workforce management. I'm going to an application. You can't even see applications on this screen, right? Everything is driven through a workspace, and then the second next level is the bookmarks. So that it's very visible to the user and can be a very powerful tool when helping people use the system and become more efficient inside of it. This is one I mentioned earlier, the Infor OS applications. I think this is just an elimination of noise. I mean, if you look in this is the current state. Everyone should be familiar with this grid. I get frustrated by it every day. I have 3 pages of 9 applications each. I get lost trying to find things, different days. I go into different applications. It's just a lot of stuff to sort through. On this page alone, all of these except Burst technically are all part of the Infor OS stack. And so it's this combined with, we also have the user management and these other things on the top side is kind of all over the place. In the new Infor OS portal, everything has been consolidated into a single application. So we're back to this navigation menu on the left. We've talked about workspaces, bookmarks, and now we're down into applications. This is where you're starting to see more of your traditional access that we're used to. The Infor OS is a new grouping of really everything that makes up security, IDM, ION API Gateway, ION Data Fabric, so on and so forth. So you're accessing it through a single space. And then you get down into your FSM, your Burst, your HR Talent, all those other applications. You can obviously move these around and choose which one's your default, and all of that functionality is still there. From a context app perspective, again, this is another one that I think not enough people are using. And with the updates to Portal v2, really everyone should be using it. It's a lot more user-friendly type of function. So as an example of what you get today in the FSM side of things. So I'm back looking at an invoice. I've got IDM stood up. We're doing OCR. We're bringing in our PDFs. We're scanning them. We're interfacing the invoices. We're approving them, all that good stuff. I'm looking at an invoice, and right now, out of the box, they have the relevant information from IDM that's actually going to pull back that image and let me look at it. What I get frustrated with this is it's pretty rigid. So this is as big as it gets. If I want it to take up half the page, I can't. This is as wide as it gets. If I want to collapse it, that's my only option. With Infor OS Portal, again, the same exact feature functionality is there. It's all user experience improvements. So you can see here, I've expanded it. I want it to take up half my window, right? I want the requisition and invoice payment to be first. All of this can just be managed right within the browser and within the session without really any development. It's all just click and drag, move around. So we've gone and said, well, to me, the requisition invoice payment information is more important than the image. So I'd rather have it on top. You can click and drag and publish that out. We can make it take up half the page. We can also pop it out to a new window. This is really cool. So if you've got two monitors, we can now pop the context widget out onto my right side monitor, and I can have FSM on my left side monitor. So not only can we make it bigger, we can also just move it to the other side so you have more screen real estate, separate that across two monitors or whatever else it might be. Or if you have a really huge monitor, you can still do split. Just a lot of flexibility with how you interact with this tool in the new version. You can also publish multiple widgets out inside of these context tabs. So the same kind of idea where we have the widgets inside the workspaces, we have the widgets inside of the context tabs. And so you have delivered context apps for Infor, which is one we're looking at. But we can also, in addition to resizing them, attach other widgets contextually into our application and publish them out to users. So a lot of flexibility there. Again, really not much different from what you have today. It just brings improvements to the user experience, I think massive improvements, and then a whole bunch of flexibility and scalability in terms of improved functionality and things that can be added with new widgets inside of the context tabs. Here's an example of another one, making that image a little bit bigger from my IDM feed. The last one I wanted to talk about was the Infor OS App Designer. There is no old versus new, really. The customers didn't really have access to anything like this before. But I just told you there were 224 widgets delivered by Infor. I'm sure they're going to keep loading more and more in there with each of the major application releases. That's great. Again, another reason to get on board. But you might look at that library, there might be 1,000 widgets that Infor provides, but there's not one that meets whatever needs you have. And so that's why they've released this Infor OS App Designer. It basically is allowing you to create your own widgets inside of the application with pretty much no coding required. I mean, you're not writing any code. My experience, though, with working you need to understand some API structures, data structures. So it's not a completely non-technical tool, but there's definitely no development required. It's very easy to use and scale up quickly. Again, this is brand new to Infor OS Portal, and it will be included with your Infor OS Portal V2. So the Infor OS Portal V2 was announced in April. I think it was completely provisioned out to all tenants in June. This is a second provisioning process. I'm actually not sure when it's complete. I just had to ask for a status update on our tenant. We did finally get it, but even as of 2 weeks ago, they had said, we're still working on that. So just because you have Portal V2 does not mean that you may have the application designer yet. If you do have it, it would be, so I'm in my Infor OS app. You have to be inside of Portal V2 to see it. But if I'm in it OS, I have this app designer tab. Before it was provisioned to my tenant, I didn't have that available, right? So it could be security related, but it also might not be provisioned yet. This probably warrants its own webinar. To me, what I've seen, my personal experience with the tool is it has a lot of potential, but it's not quite there yet from a functionality perspective. I mean, there's a lot there, but I think they need to do a couple more things for me to find real use case for a customer development process inside of it. The delivered widget library brings enough. And I just don't know that this would be required, but it is a tool that's there to incorporate, list views from APIs, whether they're Infor APIs or external APIs, pulling in data from your data lake or any sort of static list view. All of that can be configured and published through a list or form type widget with the OS App Designer. I have seen a lot of names for this. I think technically OS App Designer is the product name, but I've seen references to Infor App Designer, IAD, OAD, OS App Designer. So there's a lot of different names out there, which is pretty typical of Infor, to be honest, but that's what this tool is. So now I wanted to turn it over to Jasmine to go through and do a little bit of a live demo, and then we'll come back after that demo and talk about action items, important dates, and some next steps for your organization. Are you there, Jasmine?
Yes, I am. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, you look good.
So as Rob mentioned, this is the current Infor OS portal in our environment. We can use the application switcher to navigate to different OS applications like the home pages. My current user has these home pages set. But as it was also mentioned, we're going to be transitioning to workspaces. And in order to go into the Infor V2 portal, you add the V2 segment prior to your tenant name. So this is the navigation menu where we could see the workspaces, bookmarks, and different Infor OS applications. From here, if you're a user with administrator role, you have the ability to create workspaces within your system. So Infor delivers 18 standard workspaces, but in order to make changes to the out-of-box solution, you will have to duplicate that workspace to add more widgets. So I will create an employee workspace. There's no edit functionality here, so you would have to come to the navigation menu, duplicate it, copy, and now we can make edits. So this widget catalog houses 224 widgets that we can use throughout the various workspaces. I'm going to go ahead and add some that were not on the prior, like paychecks. Profile. Notes. Bookmarks. The web widget. And then we'll save that. And those will now show up down here. As it was mentioned, the bookmarks can all be seen from the navigation menu under here, or they can also be placed as a widget, which can link into different modules in the Infor OS application, like HR Talent. Something else that's really important is having the web widget, which can link to other third-party applications or site, which would be really handy for a different user. So I'm going to go ahead and configure this widget to link to our website. And this link can also be added to the employee menu. And we can make different groupings. So they're in both places. This can also launch into that site. So once you've made your changes, it is really important to publish that workspace to the workspace catalog so that it is available for other users to have and see. Once it's published, we can set this workspace as home if it is something that your user will navigate to various times. And then if you click up here, that will bring you there for that. We can also set different permissions for a given workspace in the OS portal, which would be navigating from here. This is the one that I just created, so I can go ahead and edit. Right now, everyone has the ability to view the role, but let's say we want to give the direct supervisor the ability to view this page. We can disable it for everyone, but give it to, let's say, that manager. That's saved. So now if I go back, you have your workspaces that you've just created. You can always continuously add or remove, set different ones as home, as mentioned. But all in all, this is workspaces in a nutshell within the new OS portal.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine. I'll take back over here. The screen share come across okay?
Yes, that's fine.
All right. So the action items, again, I mentioned this earlier, the trial mode is available now. So you can log in this minute to your tenant using that V2 qualifier that Jasmine was showing. Check it out now. Technically, as of their latest support announcement in April, Infor saying a migration is required by April 2024. So again, this is more than just a toggle. Really, there is a true migration process that happens on the back end. We'll talk about that in a second. You will need to run through the migration, and then there's the trial and finalize mode. So basically, when you're in trial mode, you can use a URL to control which experience you're in. When you're finalized, you're done, and there's only the Infor OS portal. So start to plan for that. You know, if they're going to hold true on that date, it's coming up relatively quickly. And like I said, I think it's a pretty easy lift for most customers, but the biggest thing, particularly if you have a large user population, employee self-service, there's definitely going to be change. So you got communication, maybe some documentation or collateral around that. I don't think it's, crazy amount of change, but it definitely looks different, right? So keep that date in mind and be on the lookout for any more information from Infor around whether that will stay firm. Migration considerations. So Infor does have a knowledge base article out there, 2277419. I would encourage you, particularly if you're on the IT side of things, really anyone can look at it, but I think the instructions in there are really going to apply to the IT department within the organization. This is going through that detail of, it has a matrix of the old and the new at a detailed level. What the old thing is, what the new thing is, what migrates, what doesn't migrate. All of that detail is in this knowledge base article. I thought it was good enough to where we didn't necessarily need to cover it on today's webinar, just to direct you there on what the migration path is. It is truly, from what I can tell, a process that's seems like it's reading out of your current database and inserting records into a new, and there's two separate systems on the back end that are storing all this information. With that, there's no bi-directional data flow. So once you migrate, it goes. There's nothing that gets sent back to your old tenant. So once you run that migration utility, it's pushed into the new tenant, and the new tenant's not going to be pushing anything back. I don't know if tenant is the right terminology, but the V2 versus the standard Ming.le user experience. We do have this trial mode versus finalized mode. Use this to your advantage. I think we can do, looking at like a controlled rollout, for example. So we just talked about that URL qualifier. In theory, that's live in production. So as you begin to roll things out, if you find kind of a friends and family type group, users can start doing their day jobs within Portal V2. So they can toggle back and forth between the two. One day I'm in V2, one day I'm in the old, start to collect requirements, thoughts, build your training documentation, and expose that URL to certain users that you think will be a good participant in, a controlled rollout type of scenario is one option. You have that availability until the finalized mode is turned on. So we have that trial mode versus finalized mode. Trial mode is there today. It's been there since June. You have to run the migration to get to the finalized mode, but the finalized mode is that final toggle that says, yep, I'm going to switch everything over. So once you do that, you're moved. But until then, you have this flexibility of moving between the two. There are also some security roles that are important. In order to access Portal V2, if any of you are going to that URL as we speak, I think in order to access it initially, the users need to have the Infor System Administrator or Ming.le Administrator role. So only people who have that right now likely are the ones that can access that URL. And then on a user by user basis, you can control access through portal-user and portal-content administrator for your general business users and things like that. That's going to be your differentiator. Basically, are you just a reader, or the content administrator then gives you some capability to deal with the workspaces and the widgets and the context tabs and things like that. So it's more of a developer type of role, I would consider it. Just to call out again, Jasmine did a good job demonstrating this, but the enablement for trial mode is really just a URL string in your browser. So they're calling it the V2 segment. So if you insert today, you go to Mango Portal Infor CloudSuite.com/ whatever your tenant is, you insert that V2 in between the .com and the tenant, and you'll be transformed into the portal, Infor OS Portal user experience. And you can use these simultaneously. So, we have one tab with the old, one tab with the new, all in the same browser session. Seems to work okay. So in terms of next steps, we'd be happy to schedule meetings to discuss any further questions or roadmap considerations, but I do think it's important to get in front of this one. It's kind of reminiscent to me of, if you've been on CloudSuite long enough to remember the Soho 4.0 transition. They retired the 3.5 look and feel and forced all the customers to Soho. Very different technical thing that's going on, but similar impact to the customer base. And so I wouldn't want to be kind of caught flat-footed with this. Like I said, for now, that April 2024 date is when supposedly the migration will be enforced or required. So use the time between now and then to kind of strategically plan for this. I think if you're not using, home pages today to go through the migration and turn it on is pretty easy. But based on what we've seen with the workspaces, both what's there today and also what appear to be on the roadmap items, I would highly encourage your organization to kind of rethink, well, we didn't use home pages the first time. Why? Are workspaces a better fit for us? And how can we start to incorporate them into our day-to-day operations? So I would encourage not just migrating because we're forced to, but also looking at some of these new features and trying to take advantage of them, because I do think done the right way and kind of planned strategically wouldn't require a huge investment of time, development, design effort, et cetera, and can deliver a huge return on the investment for the users, making it just a better application and day-to-day user experience. I do see that we have some questions already. I will drop over to that. Take a look.
I can help you read through them. We had one, can you opt to not allow users to build their own workspace?
Yes, and that was controlled. Again, I would encourage looking through the knowledge base article because it's tons and tons and tons of detail on this. But yes, you have that content administrator versus user role. So that's really your differentiator. If you're in as an admin, Infor System Administrator, you kind of have full access to everything. But there are security roles to further differentiate who can edit, who can design, and who can't. And I can go through the list, Chandra, I have it pulled up. The next one was, can workspaces be assigned by home country? I'm going to assume the home country you're talking about is the attribute on the employee record in HR Talent.
Yes.
It's a great question. And I think the answer is yes, if you use some creative out of the box thinking. I don't know how clear it was in Jasmine's demo, but basically the workspace assignment is 100% driven by one of two things: the specific user, which I wouldn't really recommend managing it that way, or the security role, which is a really powerful way to manage it. So she did the employee role. Logically, we would think, well, employee _ ST or whatever employee role gets auto assigned to the employee workspace. You're taking it a step further and saying, well, we have employees in the US and we have employees in Mexico or wherever else, and we want them to see different things. I understand that. And what I would recommend then is looking at your user provisioning process inside of HR Talent. where my mind would go with that is you can use action configuration and things like that. If you have the automated user provisioning turned on, it will auto push out roles to new hires. It'll deprovision users, and it can do position-based role assignments. To me, you would probably have employee ST, auto assign for all new hires. I would extend the capability of that action. I would build additional security roles potentially by country, and then build action configuration to auto assign those roles in GHR based on the home country that comes through on a hire, and then assign those roles to the workspaces. So it's still a role-based design, but you're using GHR to be smart about assigning roles, per country, potentially, would be how I would approach that. Again, you kind of have to think about that. The Infor OS Portal is part of the OS stack, so it really has no context of the employee record for the most part inside of its architecture. So there's not a home country attribute on a user in IFS or user management. We have to drill back into the HR system, and I think that being creative with the security role assignments might be the path of least resistance there. Someone said, I am a heavy bookmark user. With one click, I can see all of my bookmarks because the layout is consolidated. The new layout, even if you put the bookmarks on top, have white space and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I understand that. I think you're basically saying, I have this pulled up here that this looks great. I have 2, but if I had 20, this could start to get kind of messy, I think, because it's a lot of screen real estate for one link. To me, that might be where the bookmark widget comes in. So I think Jasmine had been in here and she edited, let me see if I can go to this one. Inside of the widget, let me drop this one out of here. Catalog, there was one for bookmarks. So if that's an important feature to your users, and I understand this was a very personal question, that I'm a heavy bookmark user and I have a ton of bookmarks, but I still think even if someone was a light bookmark user or a non-bookmark user, this might be something that you could publish out to a workspace at the employee level or something else. When you publish that out, I wonder, this might be a more manageable list of your bookmarks. So instead of going through this, allowing it to be workspace driven. But I think that's otherwise valid feedback on the bookmark list.
Is there a way to make that bigger so you can see all of your bookmarks in one place?
This thing right here? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just,
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
yeah, you
Thank
just,
you.
yeah, that's what's so great about this designer is it's simple, right? I mean, you could make the whole page a bookmark widget. So really, you could do that. You could build a workspace that is just a giant bookmark widget and have that. And because you have the tab, as I was explaining that, I'm kind of having to think on the fly about it. Like, well, now I'm in FSM, but my bookmarks, I'm dynamically kind of shooting all over the place. Well, because we have the tab browsing now, in theory, I could be drilled into FSM and I have my bookmarks right here. So it still is an extra click, but if you toggle between the two of them, and it's not terrible. So if you had a workspace with a
But
giant
all my
bookmark
bookmarks
listing,
are in FSM, so the tab names aren't going to change depending on the bookmark. They're all going to say Infor Financials and Supply Management for all of my bookmarks.
okay.
So,
Yeah, I was
so
just saying you
that's
could have a workspace here for the bookmark listing, because when you're in the application, oh, I'm in my FEG, whatever else, and now I want to drill into my invoices or whatever you're doing, you would need to come back here and then, click on that to move
yeah,
it.
that's a much more consolidated layout in that bookmark widget that you set up. So that's great. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Is user management changing? No, not really. So this is a good way to walk through some of the changes on the OS side of things. So you're used to coming, I don't know if it even is here anymore. No. So this is where you live if you're a security person under user management today. And this is what the menu looks like. In the new world, you just go into OS and then there's a security tab and it looks the exact same. So the navigational path to get there actually looks a little nicer. Navigational path to get there is different, but otherwise it's the same piece. And then again, hitting on the bookmarks, right? We could bookmark into security, and then it's even easier to get to. It's right there for you. We are multi-tenant for all applications, except we are still running hybrid single-tenant Lawson environment. Both are hosted by Infor. Will we be able to upgrade to OS Portal? Yes, because you have even if you were single-tenant everything, Lawson payroll, Lawson finance, Lawson HR, Lawson supply chain, if you've undergone the Infor OS CE migration, you are a multi-tenant Infor OS customer, ultimately. Now, with that, I will say from what I've seen with the workspaces and what I've seen with the widgets, none of them are really for Lawson, from what I've seen. So you may need to get a little creative with building your own widgets if you're primarily a Lawson shop, but you do have the Infor OS Portal available to you. Bookmark question. Is there any way to see the path as well? I don't know. I don't think there is. Yeah, not really. Not within the bookmark manager, but one of the things I do, if you are interested in the path, I'm not sure what the context of that question is, but I have a bookmark for managed vendors and I want to know how to get there. My little trick is now I'm inside FSM. This has nothing to do with OS Portal, but I'm in the navigation bar in FSM. If you right click on this and open it in a new tab, you now have this direct path to get to it. And that's how you can find the direct link in kind of a roundabout way. The next question, so it looks like we can customize and give permissions right from the home page. What is the OS Portal App Designer used for? So the OS App Designer, OAD, IAD, whatever they're calling it, this would say, if you're in here building a workspace and you get a requirement from the business that says, we want a widget that does this, shows this, and you will come through here. Now they are organized by application, right? So I have my FSM, I have my burst, I have inbox, HR talent. So you can sort through there, but if you can't find one in the library that suits your needs, that's when the application designer comes into play. So basically what you're looking at with the application designer, let me get out of here. App designer. Primarily, this is what I've seen with the functionality as it exists today. I do think there's going to be big improvements to this. I think this is kind of the first take on it. So this may change drastically in the next 12 months or so. But primarily with these app designer widgets you're creating, you're building a data service. So when you create a data service, you're saying, hey, I want to get information out of the system, either via an API, so calling into a list view inside of FSM or HR Talent or M3 or whatever you have. And then, or we can do right out of the data lake, or we can do a static list. So it's almost like a query in that sense. Hey, I want to query data from the system, and then I want to present it in a whatever format. It's a list format, it's a form format, it's a chart. So it's kind of almost like a report. If you have a widget that's a report type of thing or a data metric, those are the types of things that could be created inside of the application designer. So we have the list, chart, forms, data grid, records, banner, all these types of things. So it's attaching a data service, either via API or data lake query into some sort of visual representation. What does he? Okay, so I think I answered that question. Someone asked if the webinar is being recorded. I I think it is, Chandra. Did you record it? Yeah, it is. So it is recorded. If you registered, you'll get a link to the recording. We also publish them to YouTube. So if you haven't already been to our YouTube page, there's already a lot of other content out there. We publish all of our webinars for free consumption on YouTube, but this will be recorded. The presentation will be available. We talked about the recording. Do you know if anything we might set up now in V2 will come over when we migrate and go live? The one thing I've seen with setup is there's a comment in that knowledge base article that says, well, if you've used the application designer and you've published a widget, when you finalize your migration, you'll need to republish the app designer features. Someone said they could not find the knowledge base article. Pretty sure that's the right number. Let me make sure I. This is the KB 2277419. Yeah, so maybe it's a permissions issue. This is the right number, 2277419. This is what it would look like. I only see one of my 5 home pages in V2. Is that just because it's preliminary? No, they should all come over. I would look through the migration results and logs to see if there's maybe an issue with that, or maybe rerun the migration tool. Is there a way to duplicate a tab within a new portal? No, that's a great question, and it's something that I dislike about it because I do this all the time. If I'm in FSM, I want multiple FSMs because I'm managing my vendors and I'm managing my invoices, and I want 2 screens, and that still needs to be duplicated. So within the tabs, there can be multiple of them, but not for a single workspace or a single application. I could see that changing in the future because I agree that's a limitation of it, and I think it would be a nice feature to have. But today it's just 1 tab per app, basically, and you would still need to duplicate your browser tab to get into 2 FSMs, for example. Does banner functionality of the old home pages transfer over? That would be something to look through. It should, but that would be something to look through in more detail in that knowledge base article. A very detailed matrix in terms of what migrates, how it migrates, and what some of the limitations are. Will Infor OS replace Ming.le for the admin functions? Kind of. Again, I think I showed this earlier, that it's really not a replacement as much as it is a different navigational menu. So it's still all the same stuff behind the scenes. It's just a different way to get there. So if I click into OS and document management, now I'm in IDM. It's the same thing as instead of going through this giant grid to sort through all your stuff and figure out where you are. I think it's a little bit more intuitive, right? So by and large, all the core Infor OS applications and functionality kind of suites are all the same. It's just a different way to access them. Does the OS app designer allow us to create custom widgets with data coming from outside of Infor? That's a great question. I would say yes, but you need to be familiar with the API gateway. So it has 2 data sources for the OS app designer, Ion API gateway and data lake. Both of those services can consume and store data from external systems. To me, the data lake is probably not what you're after, but within the API gateway itself, you can look at available APIs and you can build API services. So here's an example in our system. We built a custom API suite that calls into our AWS environment and pulls information out of an S3 bucket. Now that's completely, I know Infor runs their stuff on AWS, but it's completely independent of their cloud. So if you have a API provider, an endpoint URL and it's external, that can still be managed through the API gateway, and that then makes it available not just to the OS app designer, but to things like Ion and other tools within Burst within the platform. Okay, 3 minutes left. I think I got through all the questions. If there are any others, again, Chandra will be reaching out with the recording and presentation information. I also have my contact information on the screen here and my email. Feel free to reach out. And thanks for your time and joining, and have a good rest of your day.